Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Dayna from This Pixie Creates, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make the Granny Diamond Potholder. This is the 11th potholder in our Crochet Along series. This potholder is made by crocheting a large striped granny square and seaming it together to make a diamond pattern. I'm going to show you an easy color changing technique, so you'll only have to weave in a couple of ends. You can find the free written pattern and everything you need to know linked in the description box below. Let's get started. Alright guys, before we get started, I just wanted to mention that we are going to need stitch markers. These are essential. Make sure that you have them. If you don't have stitch markers, safety pins work really well. So to start, we are going to make a slip knot, place it on your hook, and tighten it up. Now chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to find the first chain that we made, so this one right here, and we're going to go underneath that top loop of our chain. Okay, we're going to yarn over and we're going to pull the strand through the stitch, and then we're also going to pull it through the loop on our hook. And that makes, if you stretch out your work, it makes a small chain circle. And that's what we're going to be working in for round 1. To start round 1, we are going to chain 2, 1, 2, and we're going to go into the chain circle. You guys might notice that there's a bit of a hole here, or a gap. That's where we worked a slip stitch into the chain. This is the chain, but below it, if you stretch out your work, you'll see that bigger gap there, the bottom, that's our chain circle. So you want to make your stitches in there. So we're going to yarn over and we're going to insert our hook into the circle, yarn over and draw up a loop. So we have 3 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. And that makes a half double crochet. And we're going to do that once more. So yarn over, insert your hook into the circle, yarn over, draw up a loop, yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. So that is what we are going to call a cluster. A cluster is made up of 2 half double crochets. And we're going to chain 1. Now we're going to make another cluster into this chain circle. So remember guys, cluster is 2 half double crochets. And then we're going to chain 1. And we're going to do this 2 more times. So make your next cluster. Chain 1. And make your 4th cluster. Chain 1. So at this point we have a total of 4 clusters and 4 chain 1 spaces. To end the round, we are going to make a slip stitch. So right here, if you look at the side of your work, this is your chain 2. 1, 2. This doesn't count as a stitch throughout the entire pattern. So the first stitch of the round is actually this first half double crochet that we made. So it's right here. We're going to insert our hook under both loops, and we're going to yarn over, pull through the stitch and the loop on your hook, and that makes a slip stitch. Now, this is important. We're going to pull up on the loop on our hook, remove your hook, and pick up your stitch marker. And we are going to put it into the loop, and we've now marked it. Now, it's not going anywhere. Okay, the last thing that we can do is we have this tail here. This is part of our chain circle, so we can tug on it, and that kind of closes up that hole really nicely. And now we are just going to turn our work. So we're literally just going to flip it over so that we're looking at the back side of our square. Okay guys, it's time for round 2, so grab your next color, color B, and you're going to loop it over your finger. Now, this stitch marker, it marks one of our corner stitches, so we're basically just going to find any other corner chain 1 space. I'm looking at this one right here. If you separate your work a little bit, if you wiggle it around, you'll be able to see these little holes here, which are our chain 1 spaces. So just insert your hook into any of those spaces, not the one marked with your stitch marker. We're going to pick up the new color and we're going to pull it through that space. And we're going to chain 2. All right, we've now fastened on, so we are going to start round 2. So to start round 2, we're going to go into that chain 1 space again, and we're going to make a cluster stitch. All right, now we're gonna skip over this cluster here, and we're gonna go into the next chain 1 space. So again guys, if you separate your work a little bit, you should be able to see it, this hole here. We're gonna go in and we're gonna make 1 cluster stitch, chain 1, and then we're also going to make a second cluster stitch all into that same chain 1 space, and this becomes our new corner. We have arrived. You might not yet, and that's okay. If you haven't arrived at your stitch marker yet, you're just going to go into your next corner and you're going to repeat what we just did in this corner. So a cluster, chain 1, cluster, all into that same chain 1 space. Okay, now this is key. This is a key part for how we're going to change color and kind of set it up for future rounds. It can be a little bit tricky when you first get going, but it gets a lot easier as we go along. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to find our working yarn. This is the really long strand. We're just going to make sure that it's in front of our granny square, which it is. It's right here. And we're also going to bring our loop, we're also going to bring it to the front of the granny square as well. Okay, so try your best to kind of hold them in place. Going to push them to the left so that we have access to our chain 1 space. So this is our cluster, this is the beginning chain 2 that we made, and this is our chain 1 space. So with these things pushed to the left, we're going to go into that chain 1 space and we're going to make our first cluster, and then we're going to chain 1. Okay guys, now it's time to do the rest of our corner. So now grab your loop and grab your working yarn, and we're going to move them to the right. So just kind of push them out of the way, and now again guys, we still have access to that chain 1 space. It's that same space that we made our first cluster into. Okay, now going into that space, we're going to make our second cluster, and that completes our corner. So the reason that we did this, do you guys see this strand here and the loop? They're almost trapped in between these 2 clusters of our corner, which is exactly what we want, because I'll show you what happens with round 3, but you're going to see that it's going to be easily accessible now for round 3, and we're going to be able to seamlessly change color. It's really cool. Okay, then going into the next corner chain 1 space, we are going to make a cluster, chain 1, followed by a second cluster. Okay, so we have finished 3 corners, and we have our first corner still left. So we only have half of our corner at this point. We only have one cluster. So going into that first chain one space, we're gonna make a cluster, chain one, and that completes our first corner. So find your first half double crochet that you made. So right here, we're gonna go under both loops and make a slip stitch. So yarn over, pull through the stitch and the loop on your hook, and now pull up on the loop on our hook, and we're gonna mark it with our stitch marker. All right, so we have just finished round 2, and now it's time to turn our work and start round 3. So to do that, we're just going to flip our work. And now we are looking at the back side of round 2. Okay guys, we are going to find the corner with color A's stitch marker, so this one right here, and we're going to remove the stitch marker from the loop. Okay, notice that your yarn is on the back side of your granny square, which is exactly what we want. So we've removed our stitch marker. We're going to insert our hook into that corner chain one space, and we're going to place the loop on our hook, and we're just going to tighten it up. All right, now pull that loop and your hook through the space. So now the loop is at the front of our granny square, and we're going to chain 2. Now this can make things a little tight here, but just try your best to kind of feel for it. We're going to go under this chain one space, and we're going to make our first cluster to start the round. Now, between these two clusters, we didn't make any chain one spaces, but you'll notice that there is a noticeable gap. So I want you guys to go in between these two clusters, going underneath, you know, that stitch, and we're gonna make a cluster. Now, going into the next corner chain one space, we're gonna make our corner, so that's one cluster, chain one, followed by a second cluster. Okay, and now we see these two clusters here. There's no chain one space between them, but there is a space. So we're going to insert our hook, and we're going to make our next cluster. And now we see that there's color B here. We have our loop and we have our working yarn. So just like before, guys, we are going to make sure that our working yarn and our loop is kind of at the front of our granny square, and we're just going to bring it over to the left so that we can see our corner chain one space. So working into our corner chain one space, we're going to make our first cluster, chain one, and then we're going to move the loop and our working strand, we're going to move it to the right so we can go on the other side of it, and we're going to go into that same space, and we're going to make our second cluster. And that traps color B between our corner clusters. Now going into the gap or the space between our next clusters, we're going to make a cluster, going into our corner chain one space, we're going to make a cluster, chain one, followed by a second cluster. Between these two clusters here, we're going to go into that gap and we're going to make our next cluster. Okay, we've arrived back at our first chain 1 space of the round. So our corner is only half done. So we're going to insert our hook into that space and we're going to make a cluster chain 1 to complete our corner. Now we're going to find our first half double crochet of the round. So right here, and we're going to insert our hook under both loops and we're going to make a slip stitch. Now pull up on the loop on your hook and we're going to mark it with our stitch marker. And there we go. This is what round 3 is looking like. So to start round 4, we're going to turn our work, so flip it over so you're looking at the back side of round 3. Okay guys, round 4 is going to be our pattern repeat. So we're basically going to be repeating round 4 for the rest of our potholder while alternating between, color A and color B. So just like in round 3, we're going to find our next color, which is color B, where we had our stitch marker, and we're going to remove it. Now we're going to insert our hook into that chain 1 space and we're going to place the loop on our hook and then tighten it up. Pull our hook and our loop through so that it's now at the front of our work and we're going to chain 2. Now going into the corner chain 1 space, we're going to make our first cluster. And we're going to make a cluster into each space or gap between our clusters. So see how we have one here between these 2 clusters, and then we also have another gap here between these 2 clusters. So make a cluster into each space. And then when we get to our corner chain 1 space, we are going to make a cluster, chain 1, followed by a second cluster. And we're going to repeat this around. So in every gap or space between our clusters, we're going to make a new cluster. And then when we get to this corner with color A, we're going to make sure that that the loop and our strand is at the front of our granny square. And we're going to kind of push it off to the side and locate our chain 1 space. So going into that space, we're going to make our first cluster, chain 1, then push it over to the right so that we can go on the other side of it, and we're going to make our second cluster. And again guys, that just traps it in place so that we can access it next round. Okay guys, we're at the end of the round and we've arrived back at our first corner. So going into that corner chain 1 space, we're going to make a cluster, chain 1 to complete our corner. We're going to find our first half double crochet, go into it under both loops and make a slip stitch. Now pull up on the loop on your hook and you're going to mark it with your stitch marker. And there we go. This is what round 4 should look like. To start round 5, just flip your work so that we're looking at the back side of round 4. Alright guys, let's pretend that we are at the end of round 16. So we're no longer going to be changing color, we're just going to keep working with color B. We've just worked a slip stitch to join round 16. So now we're going to turn our work And we're going to chain 2 to start the round. And we're just going to work this round the same as normal. So going into that corner chain 1 space, we're going to make our first cluster, and then we're going to continue on working a cluster in each space until we get to our corner chain 1 space. So the only difference is that we're not fastening off. We are just literally just turning our work and continuing on from where we left off. Alright guys, we are at the end of our potholder. So this is the end of round 20. So what we're going to do now, we just made our last slip stitch. So we're going to fasten off and we're going to leave a really long tail because we're going to need it to seam our potholder closed. So to do that, we're just going to yarn over, pull through the loop on your hook, and keep pulling, and that just makes a really long tail. And when you're happy with it, it should be around 40 inches just to be, on the safe side, to make sure that you have enough. When it's long enough, you're gonna trim it with your scissors. And now we are just going to pull on it, pull tight, and that closes that knot, and now we have a really nice long tail for seaming. Okay guys, it's time to seam our potholder closed. The only thing that I wanted to mention is whichever side that you like best, whichever side that you find is the prettiest, you want to have that side facing down, because that's going to be the side that is going to show up when we've actually folded up our potholder. See, now this side will be showing. We're just going to start with our long seaming tail. So whichever corner that is, we're going to fold that one there, and then we're going to pick another corner right beside it, and we're going to fold that one as well. And before you seam your potholder closed, weave in all of your ends except for your long seaming tail. Okay guys, thread your needle with your tail. And what we're going to do is we're going to start in our corner chain 1 space. So it's a little dark here, but we're going to start here, and we're going to find the matching chain 1 space of our other corner, and we're going to put our needle through. And we're just going to pull that whole tail through. And we're going to find the next stitch of our first corner, and we're going to go underneath both loops. And we're going to find the matching stitch of our second corner, going underneath both loops, and we're going to pull that yarn through. And pull it nice and tight, that way it creates a really nice seamless join. Okay, now going into every stitch across, we're going to go under both loops of the matching stitches, and we're going to pull our yarn through. And remember guys, give it a little tug at the end, pull it nice and tight. Okay guys, we just have a couple more stitches to work into. Sorry that it's a little hard to see. Alright, now we are done. We've seamed these two corners together, and our goal with this is we want to use the same strand to seam all 4 corners closed. So what we're going to do is we are going to find, the corner of our potholder, and we're going to insert our needle into that corner so that it goes inside of our potholder right here, and we're going to find that needle with our hand and pull it through. Okay, now our needle is back here where we started, and you can't tell. So what we're going to do now is just fold our next side, and again we're going to start in that corner chain 1 space. So going into that corner, we are going to find the matching corner of our next, and we're just going to pull through. And then just like before, we're going to find our next stitch going under both loops. We're going to find our matching stitch in our next corner and go through. So always go underneath both loops of each stitch and then pull your yarn through and pull tight to create that seamless join. We've now joined 3 corners together. So again, we're going to go into the corner, insert our needle so that it's going inside of our potholder, and we're going to pull the needle and the yarn through. Okay, now we're going to fold our 4th corner, and again we're going to go into the corner chain 1, and we're going to find the matching corner chain 1, and then we're going to go into the next stitch, find those 2 matching stitches, and pull our yarn and needle through. If you have a hole still in this corner, what we can do is we can just kind of go through this corner. We can find the next corner here, and we can just kind of try to weave a few stitches to kind of join them and get rid of any hole or space before we proceed with joining our last side. Now that we've seamed our potholder closed, it's time to add our chain circle. So it really doesn't matter where we add it, just pick whatever corner you like. And we're just gonna poke our hook kind of through the top if we can. There we go. We're gonna grab color B, but I'm gonna use pink because color B is too dark. So loop it over your finger and pick it up with your hook and pull it through your potholder. Okay. Now we're going to chain 13. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Now we're going to find the first chain that we made, so this one right here, and we're going to look at it from the side. So do you guys see those 2 loops? We have this loop and then the back, the one on the back. So we're going to go insert our hook under both of those loops. We're going to yarn over, pull through the loops and also through the loop on your hook, and that makes a chain circle. Now to fasten off, we're going to yarn over, pull through the loop on our hook, and keep pulling to make a long enough tail. And we're going to pull tight to close that knot. Now what we're going to do is thread our needle with the tail, and we're just going to kind of go through the inside of our potholder and pull that strand through. And then you guys can make a knot and weave it through, you know, a few more stitches to really make it nice and tight. And then when you're ready, trim your ends, and you're going to repeat that for this second strand here. Alright guys, so that completes our Diamond Granny Potholder. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please feel free to give it a like and subscribe for more fun crochet content. We have one more potholder coming next month. It'll be December 1st. So I will see you guys then. I hope you have a wonderful day and happy crocheting.